Good evening, Mr. Bond fans, and welcome once again. The past few years have been something of a dark age for 007 video game fans like myself.
It used to be the case that a new Bond adventure would take to a console every year or two, and, as I've said many times before, these were a great way of filling the content void for us mega fans as we awaited the next cinematic 007 exploit. From Agent Under Fire through GoldenEye Reloaded, I consider myself to have grown up through something of a 007 gaming golden phase. While not every game of the era was a complete gem, each one contained interesting takes on the Bond world with new stories and characters in most of them.
So, of course, like every Bond fan in 2012, I was very excited at the prospect of a new game that paid homage to the film series' roots, while mixing in first-person shooter action with on-rail segments and driving levels. And if I couldn't be more excited, this was coming to us from the developers of Nightfire and GoldenEye Reloaded, two of the very best Bond video games to date, to my mind.
Sure, I prefer Bond games to have original stories, but when the promotional material for 007 Legends was doing the rounds, I was getting very, very excited, what with missions based on a single film from each actor's tenure as 007. Moonraker, On Her Majesty's Secret Service, Die Another Day, License to Kill, Goldfinger, and Skyfall.
I could not have been more excited for this. I was so pumped, and on top of that, I got to go to the video games press launch at BAFTA in London. I could not have been more hyped for a Bond game than at that point in 2012. So, all these years since 007 Legends release, let's talk about the crushing, agonizing disappointment that is this game.
The single-player campaign begins with a recreation of a section of the pre-credit scene from Skyfall, where Eve, voiced by Naomi Harris, here is instructed by Judi Dench's M to shoot one or both of these men fighting on top of a train. A figure resembling James Bond falls off the bridge and into water, where we see ghostly apparitions talking to the camera before the player wakes up in some kind of beach house, where there's a phone ringing and a girl painted gold on the bed, and then Judi Dench informs Bond to go and investigate someone called Goldfinger in Switzerland, because apparently he's behind the rise in gold prices. And then we have an opening credit sequence.
I'm on my way.
I don't know where to begin in explaining how terrible this introductory sequence is to the game.
Firstly, there's no context for anything. If you're not a Bond aficionado, then I can't imagine you'll have any idea what's going on, especially as the game was released before the movie Skyfall. I mean, some backstory would have been appreciated, or even just a bit of setup. The reveal of the Golden Girl is incredibly lame. Elements of the graphics are already disappointing, and I mean, Bond pre-credit sequences are a staple for big action and fun. When you look at other games that have adhered to the Bond formula of opening levels before titles, there are some pretty good ones. GoldenEye Reloaded, Everything or Nothing, and Nightfire spring to mind, but this is just baffling and annoying. I mean, you know, the title sequence is set to a modern, updated instrumental version of Goldfinger, arranged by David Arnold, which is pretty great, but the sequence itself is just uninspired and over so abruptly, giving it the feeling of being slapped on at the very last minute. Just as an aside here, the loading screens in this game feel like they take forever to finish, so get used to rereading the same tips over and over and over again. But whatever, it's on with the game as Bond arrives in, I guess, Switzerland to infiltrate Goldfinger's factory in order to prove that the villain is smuggling gold out of the UK. Tanner, voiced by Rory Kinnear, is on hand to brief Bond and warn him to keep a low profile, which is promptly ignored by Bond using, well, some kind of gadget to down a fighter jet. And then, holy hell, everything is blowing up. Where do I go again? Christ, I can barely see anything. I mean, what are all these fighter jets doing at Auric Enterprises anyway? Is Goldfinger smuggling gold in F-18s in this universe?
Far be it for me to complain about a shoot-'em-up that begins with a very much action-packed level, but the start of this level really goes high-octane a bit too fast. I don't know if this was always intended to be the first level of the game, but it's a bitch if you're just learning how to use the controls for the first time. There's so much going on, and not in a good way.
But for seasoned Bond players, the controls and weapons and layout are very, very similar to GoldenEye Reloaded, but more importantly than that, a far more interesting feature also makes a reappearance from that previous game in the form of hilariously named vending machine snacks.
So Bond fans, are you ready for this? Here are my top 5 best Bond video game vending machine snack names, starting with...
At number 5, we have Chocolade. At number 4, Bar. Number 3 goes to You Like It. Coming in at number 2 is Yeah, but number 1 is still the Thai Sausage. Anyway, on with the much less interesting aspect of the game, which is actually playing it. I start to have flashbacks to GoldenEye Rogue Agent very quickly, as it feels like you just endlessly shoot your way through Goldfinger's factory, minus the awesome production design of Rogue Agent. This is the worst kind of shooter experience, where you feel like you're blasting your way infinitely from room to room with little understanding of what you're actually supposed to be doing. Indeed, the entire story of each section of the game is rushed through so quickly that it's hard to remember what's at stake, and so you just end up blindly following the marker around each level.
Occasionally there are segments where stealth tactics are encouraged, but the stealth mechanics in this game are just so infuriating, it's almost impossible.
And I'm not just saying that because I'm not a fan of stealth tactics. You can knock guards out quite easily, but once they're down, they don't disappear. They stay there and you can't move them. So if anyone sees that body, the alarm is raised, which makes it very difficult to get a decent plan in action. Not only that, but it's very difficult to judge also a guard's line of sight, and especially when there are a dozen guards in a room or so at any one time, all with different routes and different lines of sight. It's just a hell of a lot quicker to barge through all guns blazing, even if it does mean that extra goons are dispatched. Anyway, eventually we get face to face with Pussy Galore. While I'm going to knock the game for a lot of things, the rendering of these classic characters is really quite amazing, and generally I think the characters are animated very well when it's a dedicated cutscene, but when you're just walking and talking to them in gameplay, they're so wooden and jittery. A new melee fight system is introduced as you accompany Pussy to infiltrate Goldfinger's office. Reloaded had a very similar button-pressing fight system, and I kind of guess I prefer it here in that there's a bit more choice and, dare I say, skill involved, but it's still not terribly exciting.
By the way, I didn't catch your...
James Bond.
Sorry, could you repeat that, please? I don't think I caught the iconic introductory line.
By the way, I didn't catch your...
James Bond.
Right, I see. So this is a game marketing itself as a celebration of 50th anniversary of a film series, messing up one of the most iconic lines of that film series? I mean, I have no clue how you get something like that wrong.
Bond and Pussy break into Goldfinger's office, and pleasantly it becomes clear that gadgets are a part of the gameplay again. Hurrah! My personal favourite, the laser watch, makes a welcome return, and there's a safe-cracking device too, but the smartphone also has several apps crucial for sleuthing, including a fingerprint scanner and a camera. At first this all seems pretty cool, and as you know if you've seen my previous reviews of the Daniel Craig era games, I felt like they've lacked from, a lack of gadgets completely, but the novelty here quickly wears off, I'm sad to say, as it becomes clear that almost every level in the game has a villain's office in which Bond must do the exact same thing with all the same gadgets. It becomes repetitive and really quite dull, but more on that later on. There's a lot of poorly executed exposition here, as Bond and Pussy have to recap an hour's worth of movie in a couple of minutes, but yeah, Goldfinger's plot is to use gas canisters to knock out the army surrounding Fort Knox and radiate the gold, yada yada yada. Goldfinger and Oddjob appear, and there's a little battle with Oddjob, which leads Bond to go falling out of the office window and land on a plane outside in a rather painful looking position.
I love how Bond isn't even really affected by his scrotum being used as an airbag to cushion the impact here. But then I suppose after what happened with Le Chiffre in Casino Royale, Bond is probably somewhat immune now to testicular torture.
Bond makes it out and heads to his Aston Martin to find... Ling? waiting in the car, and we get a reprise of the ejector seat moment from the film, and then Bond is knocked out, and then we have a recreation of the famous laser sequence. It's just really annoying how the game is hellbent on recreating these big, famous Bond movie moments, just for the sake of it, at the expense of the gameplay.
A lot of these moments throughout the game are covered in cutscenes, so it's just like, great, I'm getting to watch an inferior version of a scene that I love in another media format. Yay!
It also becomes very apparent here that not only is the voice actor for Goldfinger not quite as good as the guy from Rogue Agent, but Bond himself, dear old Daniel Craig, either couldn't be paid enough or couldn't be bothered to provide his own voice for the game.
Goldfinger, do you expect me to talk?
No, Mr. Bond. I expect you to die.
You're forgetting one thing. If I don't call in, MI6 will send 008 to replace me. They know what I know.
You know nothing, Mr. Bond.
Not that Daniel Craig is the best voice actor by any stretch of the imagination, I don't think, but it just means that the game is lacking a certain kind of authenticity by lacking the Bond actor of the time voicing him. I mean, it's been the first time in many years that we've had a Bond game where Bond has been the main focus of that game, and he hasn't been voiced by an actor who played him.
Anyway, the story moves along to the next level with more terribly written cutscenes as Bond wakes up at Fort Knox, and action quickly kicks off as you're handed an assault rifle by ghosts or something, and join Felix Leiter and the CIA in storming the gold reserve to prevent Goldfinger from setting off an atomic bomb inside. It's actually pretty intense for so early in the game with lasers and rocket launchers to contend with. It's not that it's hard by virtue of difficulty, more that you can just be playing away for ages and one rogue rocket can just end everything. By the way, the game loses points for not having blood trickle down the screen as you die. I mean, the multiplayer feature has it, why doesn't the single campaign? It's like the most obvious Bond trope to recreate, and they don't even do that. It's during this level especially that I have unfortunate flashbacks to GoldenEye Rogue Agent. This level feels endless and comprises of very dull shootouts in various places of Fort Knox, made worse by the fact that there's no cool Ken Adams sets to marvel at. The environments are all really quite dull. It's mindless shooting, absolutely completely devoid of fun. And when I play this level in particular, I just can't wait for it to end, and sure enough it does, with a recreated fight with Oddjob, complete with the electrocution and the bomb being deactivated with just 007 seconds to go, and then we get another scene poorly recreated from the movie.
You have interfered with my plans for the last time, Mr. Bond. Stand up.
It's dangerous to fire a gun in a plane, Goldfinger.
Go! I told you to change course.
So yeah, Goldfinger is sucked out of the window and Bond is struggling up to the cockpit, and then the level just ends, and that's it for the Goldfinger segment, because it's back to Bond bubble hallucinations. I seriously pity any casual Bond fan coming into this who maybe hasn't seen Goldfinger a few years and doesn't know the movie line by line like I think most of us do, because really, if you aren't a massive fan of those movies or have them fresh in your mind, you're probably wondering what the hell is going on here. But anyway, let's see if Majesty's gets a better treatment, shall we, as we move into the next level.
I don't know what to say.
Say yes.
What about my father? What about Blofeld?
It's over. If MI6 wants to let him go, there's nothing I can do about it.
You know, this game was nominated for an award for writing. I mean, I get it, it had a rushed production and everything, but having James Bond swoop in and be the one saying to Tracy, say yes, is just not Bond. It's so awkward and weird, and for Bond to be like, oh well, if MI6 want to let Blofeld go, there's nothing I can do about it, is there? Is just so bizarrely, casually contradicting the movie on Her Majesty's Secret Service, where Bond was willing to bloody resign over being taken off the Blofeld case.
This wouldn't be so bad if it was amongst, you know, decent gameplay, but the next level is a semi-on-rails affair where you control Bond on skis, saving Tracy from some goons. This level is so frustrating, you're just thrust into it with barely any time to acknowledge the controls, and maybe it's just sour grapes on my part, because I die so many times during this level. But at least it's mercifully short as Tracy's kidnapped, and it's immediately into the next level as you storm Piz Gloria with Draco and his men. The level begins by whooshing you around Piz Gloria, and you use a manned weapon to shoot enemies around the place. It's fine, but lord is it intense. I mean, there are rocket launchers everywhere, tanks and so on, and it's... like I said earlier on, it's really not that this game is difficult. I'm not complaining about that. It's just that there's hardly any variation in the enemies you face, so it all just ends up feeling very repetitive. Anyway, hop out the helicopter and back onto the endless, mindless shooting. It's the same situation here too, it's just everything is thrown into every level. So there are snipers, rockets, machine guns, like all over the place. But anyway, there's a feature of the game, which I may as well talk about here, where you can upgrade weapons with scopes and attachments and such, and unlock extra features, which in theory, it sounds like a good idea, but it's just not terribly exciting, nor is it terribly handled in a very Bond-like way. It's not like this is a drop from Q or anything, it's just these boxes that you find dotted about the place. The game puts you in night vision goggles and sends you through a small maze consisting of bedrooms that Blofeld's Angels of Death resided in the film. It's supposed to be a disorienting affair, and Draco goes on about like, oh, James, how will we ever get out of this maze and such, but it's actually really easy. You just follow your objective marker. There's really no skill involved with getting out of this so-called maze. Anyway, Tracy is rescued and must eat a hell of a lot of carrots. The her vision is quite perfect despite Bond and Draco's need for the goggles. Bond continues his shooting spree through Blofeld's lair, which is actually pretty cool for all of the drumming I gave the previous level set design. I always enjoyed Blofeld's underground lair in the movie, despite not seeing too much of it, so it's nice to see that environment expanded here. And the level culminates with a fisticuffs with Blofeld on a cable car. It's quite clear that this particular Blofeld is not based on any film-specific actor, but honestly, this might be my favourite official incarnation of Blofeld on screen in terms of physical appearance.
He's more of an amalgamation, really. He has the pleasant scar, he has the Savalas physicality, he has the sneering face of Grey. I really like it. I just wish it had more to do in this game.
As once the fight is done, it's straight over to Bond and Tracy driving away from their wedding, and we get a piss-poor recreation of the fateful scene from Majesty's where Tracy is shot dead. But then we immediately move on to a dead Della and an injured Felix. I mean, I guess there is something of a natural segue. I mean, you know, dead wives and all that, but it's pretty darn jarring.
Similar to Blofeld, I actually quite like the presentation of Felix in this game. He has a good voice and appearance, I buy him as a CIA agent, he has a good physicality. It works for me, though I am quite surprised they didn't go with a Jeffrey Wright look-alike, given his connection to the Craig movies.
Things immediately move along and you're being flown in a helicopter by Pam Bouvier with both the likeness and voice of the original actress, Carey Lowell. Again, no real explanation for why we're in this particular situation, but off you go. It's nice to hear Lowell recording original dialogue for her Bond girl nonetheless. I mean, indeed, the game makers must have wanted to get their money's worth of her, because throughout this level, every now and then in your earpiece your earpiece will go and you'll start listening to just a conversation she's having with Fran Sanchez.
So let me get this straight, pal. You're offering me protection. You're offering to bust my competition.
You've been lucky so far. When we busted your courier with that $2 million, we still couldn't figure out how you're getting the drugs into America. But you are a target, and sooner or later, your luck is going to run out.
Doesn't really have much to do with anything, but like I say, it's nice to hear her, if nothing else. Also nice to see the likenesses of Robert Davi and Benicio del Toro too, despite neither actor returning to voice their character. Anyway, the outside of Sanchez's facility is one of the better environments in the game to explore, and you get a nice dark gun pen, but again, because the stealth mechanics are so flawed in this game, it's really not worth doing anything other than just barging in all guns blazing. After planting some bombs around the inside of the facility and then going and snooping around Sanchez's office, it's time to escape. But oh no, Bam is rumbled, meaning that Bond does the only obvious sane thing and blow the whole place up, which actually nearly kills Pam and himself, so well done 007. There's a fight with Dario which ends with him going into the grinder just like in the film, and then it's off to shoot your way out of the facility with Pam in tow.
Can I just say, and this is a relatively minor gripe really, but during the course of this level, Bond passes out, not once, not twice, but 3 times. 3 times he passes out. Again, this is, I know that on a technical side of things, this is necessary to facilitate environment loading times, but it's just lazy writing. I mean, like, if you need to segue, can you not figure out something else to do than just like, oh yeah, he bangs his head and is knocked out again? I mean, how screwed up would your head be if you'd been knocked out 3 times in the space of 15 minutes?
Anyway, on to the next level. Bond and Pam commandeer a helicopter, and Bond drops into a vehicle, prompting a fully-fledged driving level. Woohoo! I always go on about how much I like it when Bond games provide this kind of variety, and I'm pleased to see the mechanic returning here. But, then that's a big but, because like everything else in this game, in theory, this is great. In practice, it's so lackluster. This level in particular just involves driving past cars and goons with rocket launchers while in pursuit of Sanchez, but there's no real chase element involved, and it's just one street. There's not much you can really do to dodge the firepower, so often it's best just to maintain speed and soak up the hits. But anyway, of course, Bond catches up with Sanchez and there's a brawl before Bond passes out again, and then we have another poor visualization of a moment that was so much better in the movie.
No. All this for my friend.
Again, this dialogue is just so bad. I mean, I thought that say yes was the pits, but for my friend is just the worst.
More watery hallucinations, and we move on to the Dine of the Day segment, making Pierce Brosnan the only Bond who has had all of his films translated to video games in some way. The Ice Palace is a great environment, and the game certainly seems to know this, as it treats you to a sweeping camera movement throughout the environment to begin the level. The party scene from the movie is in full swing, and judging by this lady's erratic movements, some are enjoying the festivities a little more than others, or maybe she's just shivering because it's really damn cold. Bond finds his contact for the mission at the bar, Jinx, who, despite looking nothing like her movie counterpart, at least has the ability to get James Bond's main catchphrase correct.
Bond? James Bond?
You must be Jacintia Johnson.
My friends call me Jinx.
It's interesting that they don't even make an attempt at having Jinx look anything like Halle Berry. I guess it was a rights issue, or maybe Berry was just too expensive to use the likeness of, but Toby Stephens wasn't, apparently, as he's another actor who's back voicing his character. The pair are investigating Gustav Graves by, you guessed it, breaking into his room and using the same gadgets to open the door, find a safe, locate a switch, etc. It's all the same. And after that's done, it's on to a cutscene where Graves makes his big speech announcing the Icarus satellite to the world. In one of the very worst video game cutscenes I've ever witnessed, the lighting when Icarus begins to shine is pathetic. There are shots like this where I have no idea what I'm supposed to be looking at because everything's so blurry, it's blurring together. There's literally no crowd. No one is there watching this, unless all of the applause we hear is actually coming from inside people's cars as it's far too cold to be stood outside. Either that or maybe Bond and Jinx really are the only ones interested in this satellite and everyone else is just at this party for the free bar. Much like in the movie, Bond investigates the neighbouring mine, and again, it's one of the better environments from the game. It's kind of faithful to how it was in the film. But regarding the gameplay itself, I'm honestly at a loss for what to say, because it's just more of the exact same stuff, just mindless shooting and bad stealth mechanics. It's incredibly boring, and no amount of nicely detailed set design can make up for that. Even this room, where I expect a turtle-necked Elliot Garver to burst in at any moment, things take a turn when you're rumbled by Graves, who uses his dark Sith powers against Bond.
He's literally shooting lightning from his hands. I'm surprised we don't get him making big, bold claims about how his Icarus satellite is going to bring him unlimited power.
No time for Star Wars references though, as the game insists we recreate the scene from the movie with all the lasers, but this time with Zhao in attendance. After this, it's yet more mindless shooting until we get to the next level, which mercifully offers some variety. It's another driving level, this time in a gadget-laden Aston Martin and Zhao appearing to shoot rockets at you. In theory, this should be so up my alley and exactly the sort of thing I've been craving, but once again, it's just so poorly executed. due to the gadgets on the Aston can only really be used once prompted by Tanner, as if Bond didn't realise that the car was already full of missiles. Tanner's just like, by the way, Bond, have you thought of activating your missiles? You know you can do that, right? And even the controlling of said missiles is so lame. You need to just basically maintain a speed and avoid Zhao's weapons, and the missiles fire automatically and the level's over before it feels like it even gets started as you drive onto Graves' departing plane.
This level, more than any other, really just sums up my frustrations about how much wasted potential there is in this game, and I think it's partly because you're in an Aston Martin and you're on ice, so obviously I'm thinking back to similar levels from a good game like the 007 Nightfire, and I can't help but be annoyed because despite the driving levels in Bloodstone being passable, we haven't had a decent driving adventure in a Bond game since 2005's From Russia with Love.
The Dine of the Day retelling wraps up with a short level which showcases Bond's battle with Graves, and it's Sith lightning galore, but you know, at least Toby Stephens sounds like he's having fun hamming it up.
I'm going to teach you a lesson you won't forget or survive.
I might even prefer some of his line deliveries here to ones that are actually in the movie version.
You see, Mr. Bond, you can't kill my dreams, but my dreams can't kill you. Time to face destiny.
This version of Graves meets his end in much the same way as his movie counterpart, before Bond is knocked out again, and then has to escape the plane with Jinx. I mean, who knows what she was doing while this battle was going on, but this part of the level is actually pretty fun, and you won't hear me saying that much about this game, but as you're running down the plane and trying to escape, I thought it was pretty good. You're shooting the locks to try and get the helicopter operational. It's, you know, I'll take what I can get at this stage. That's it for Dine of the Day, and now it's on to Moonraker. For some bizarre reason, all the other levels are in order of chronology, so it's odd that this one isn't. I can only assume that because the level features some zero gravity and it's in space and all that, that it seemed like a big note to end on, so that's why we have it at the end of the game, before the downloadable Skyfall levels, of course. The mission begins at Drax Industries, and Bond must rendezvous with Dr. Goodhead to catch up on whatever nefarious things Drax might have been up to. Curiously, Dr. Goodhead in the game does not bear the likeness of movie actress Lois Chiles. However, in some early trailers for the game, she very much did, implying that some kind of change was made quite late in the game's development. I'm not sure what would cause the game makers to think that they could use the likeness of Lois Chiles and then have to change it, but whatever, it's a shame because Dr. Goodhead is one of my favourite Bond girls and I would have liked to see her represented properly here. But now that you're all caught up with the good doctor, can you guess what you have to do next? Why, investigate Drax's office, of course. He has a mighty impressive office, don't get me wrong. In fact, all the villains in the game have had superb offices, but, you know, the centre of a villain's administrative tasks has, oddly enough, never been a great point of interest or concern for me in the movie, so quite why this game feels the need to focus so much on where Franz Sanchez and Hugo Drax respond to their emails, I don't know. Something I haven't touched on yet, but I think is actually quite notable, how much blood there is in this game. I mean, every time you get a shot in, blood bursts from the villains' bodies. I find it curious because Bond games are usually, much like the movies themselves, light on such gore effects, and given that the game shares so many similarities with GoldenEye Reloaded, I'm surprised that someone somewhere decided to pipe up and suggest that we needed explosions of bodily fluids, as if that was something that the fans were all clambering for. Anyway, Bond and Goodhead uncover that Drax is planning to eradicate life on Earth and begin a new super race of humans by transporting prime human specimens to an orbiting space station and gas everyone left behind. Again, some very impressive visuals here. For all of my, I think, well-founded griping about the game so far, I do actually quite like the Moonraker levels in this game. While there's still a lot of mindless shooting, the environments are cool and there's enough variation with having to protect Dr. Goodhead and enforced stealth levels that play fine here that, you know, I'm kept happy. Another very positive inclusion is the appearance of Jaws, always a welcome sight in Bond video games, and the fight that you have with him is lots of fun. Even if they do get the whole kicking Jaws in the balls gag from the movie wrong. I mean, it's like it's funny in the movie because there's the big clang, and then it implies that he's got like steel balls or something, and that's why that works, and that, I mean, what? Here it's just Bond kicking a guy in the balls, and if anything, I just feel sorry for Jaws more. Also impressive is that Michael Lonsdale comes back to voice Hugo Drax.
You're too late. I've already called in. There are troops on the way.
I think you're bluffing. But even if you aren't, I'll be long gone by then. You know, I had considered bringing the two of you along as breeding specimens, but you didn't make the cut. Take them away. Dispose of them.
Bond is, of course, knocked unconscious, and when he wakes up, you and Dr. Goodhead must escape the fiery exhaust of a departing Moonraker shuttle in another very fun segment. Yes, you've heard me right. I've used that word a few times in the past couple of minutes, and I'm indeed having fun here in this level. Bond and Goodhead get kitted out in astronaut gear, and then it's up to you to blast their way through to the next Moonraker shuttle due to launch. The Moonraker laser also makes a welcome return, but what the hell is up with this laser effect?
It looks nothing like the one that they use in the film, and I mean, like, in the previous game, they perfected the look of it, and here they changed it to make it less accurate to the film? Like, I don't know what facilitated that decision.
The heroes get to the shuttle after a pretty exciting firefight involving a helicopter and plenty of goons. Like, seriously, I have no evidence to back this up, but I can only assume that this was the first level of the game to be developed and created and so on and so forth, because this is all really impressive. Like, this is all really great. And speaking of which, the next cutscene is the most incredible of the whole game as Bond and Goodhead leave Earth. I mean, I assume we'll never actually see Craig's Bond going to space in the movie, so this is something of a surreal sight, but indeed just on a separate thing. There is something just a bit off about having Craig's Bond in these classic Bond situations. It's just weird having him share the same space as the likes of Gustav Graves, Pussy Galore, Franz Sanchez. If they really wanted to celebrate the series' 50th anniversary, then having it be a third-person shooter and having each Bond's likeness from the corresponding film, so like Roger Moore in Moonraker, for example, that would have been a real treat for die-hard fans. Heck, you know, this time all the Bonds are alive, they could have got them all back and done the voice work. That would have been, I mean, this is obviously a fantasy of mine, but God, wouldn't that have been so fantastic?
Greetings to all. Welcome aboard your temporary home. Here in the untainted cradle of the heavens, we will create a new super race, a race of perfect physical specimens.
We have a laser confirmed lock on the target.
Come in, Tanner.
Bond?
What
are you doing on this frequency?
I'm with Dr. Goodhead.
Tanner, this is Holly Goodhead. I need you to contact Felix Leiter. Tell him to launch Operation Steel Heaven.
Anyway, next level has Bond and Goodhead aboard the space station. More impressive visuals and sets, but I can't help but be slightly disappointed that Ken Adams' iconic designs from the movie weren't replicated more faithfully. I get that the idea is here to modernize those old adventures with the Craig era, but when you're taking some of cinema's most iconic settings and just, well, blanding them up, it can't help but be slightly disappointing. Bond and Goodhead are captured as Bond is, of course, knocked out, and when he comes to, he manages to persuade Jaws to come over to the side of good, which results in a big battle taking place in anti-gravity, which is really fun, and same goes for the part in which you control Bond floating around outside the space station. I'm having Nightfire flashbacks, but not in a derogatory way. Like that, those levels in Nightfire were great, and this level here is also great. Again, like, I can only assume that these Moonraker levels were developed much earlier in the rest of the game, so they had more attention or whatever, but God, if the rest of the game was this fun as these two levels have been, we'd have a pretty solid game here. The level culminates with Bond having to destroy the poison pods as they are being prepped for launch, and then sending Drax to his end while the station blows up around you. And apparently all the effort that was taken to create this game went into the cutscenes in those two last levels, because this particular bit ends super abruptly, and then it's straight into the last section of the game that focuses on Skyfall, but no watery apparitions or anything like that. It's just like, nope, fade to black, and fade back in, and we're in Skyfall, apparently.
They're dead.
Patrice is on the roof.
I'm going after him. You follow in the car.
The first Skyfall level is based on the pre-credit sequence of the film and involves chasing an assassin named Patrice around Istanbul. It's more of the same shoot-'em-up stuff, but there is a sort of quasi-driving section where Bond hops on a motorbike. I say quasi because it's mostly on rails and you actually have very little control over the bike. You steer and speed up, but that's about it. Another missed opportunity. The level follows the opening of Skyfall quite faithfully, and you end up on top of a train with Patrice, and there's a fisticuffs which you just need to keep up with until the inevitable happens and Eve accidentally shoots Bond, and then we're back to the very start of the game with Bond falling into the water.
It's never really clear whether Bond was having flashbacks or whether all the other levels of the game are just hallucinations. Not that we can take anything that the game presents as canon, but I just think it's interesting how they attempt to weave the timeline in together, given that Connery through Brosnan has been established as being a separate timeline, a separate continuity to what we're on now with Craig, and that timeline started afresh. For a while, I believed that this game was kind of hinting at the idea that maybe like Casino Royale and Quantum of Solace were the, the first Bond adventures, and then in between those films and Skyfall, Craig's Bond experienced all the same things that the other Bonds did, irrespective of timeline. Obviously it doesn't work on a linear timeline, but still that he'd had a wife and that, Felix had had his leg bitten off, all that kind of stuff. Given that the series is a shifting timeline, a non-linear timeline, I thought that's what they were getting at, but since Spectre confirmed that Blofeld is a completely different entity in the Craig-verse, that's obviously not the case, so I guess this game is really just the fevered dreams of an MI6 agent.
Anyway, we see Bond wash up alive on shore, and then after a loading screen it's straight into the next level, which is based on the Shanghai sequence from Skyfall, which is another complete non sequitur. Like, how are we supposed to understand what's going on when the narrative just keeps hopping around like this? It just feels so disjointed and haphazard. I don't even know why they bothered to tie all these levels together at all, if this is really the best they could do. Anyway, very basic last level here. You just need to photograph Patrice and then shoot at him until he's dead. And disappointingly, he doesn't have an office to infiltrate at all, and the shootout isn't that difficult, so completing the game will pose little issue to the few dozen people who've had the gumption to reach this point. But there is a fist fight with Patrice, and then that's it. The game's over. Just one more excruciatingly horrible cutscene to endure.
M here. Do you have an update?
Patrice is dead.
Well done, 007. But there's still one piece of unfinished business. About your injuries. You should know that I ordered that agent to shoot. Even though she didn't have a clear shot. I'm sorry.
Don't say it. You did what you had to. We all do what we have to survive.
Very well, 007. Mr. Tanner will be calling you with your next assignment. Good luck, Bond.
Bond here.
Seriously, I'm sorry, that's fine. Really? That's how we're wrapping up the fact that M ordered a potentially fatal shot at James Bond. Really? Wow. Skyfall wasted a good 2 hours on that central character conflict, didn't it? And achieving great drama with it, when all M really had to do was say sorry. Sorry, like this sorry excuse of a Bond game.
But we're not done yet. There are some incentives to replay the game if you're of a masochistic disposition. There's a whole XP system that you can use to purchase weapon upgrades, along with skills like improved aiming, quicker reloads and such. There are also objects scattered around most levels, where if you collect them you gain more intel on main characters of the game, like biographical details and such. I've never had the inclination to unlock everything in this game like I have almost every other Bond game I've played, so I can't speak with 100% authority on this, but most of these are quite dull. In fact, all of them are details, and there's nothing really especially interesting or juicy. There are also character and concept artwork to unlock. Much like in GoldenEye Reloaded, there is a challenge mode where you have to accomplish certain tasks. Like there's one, for example, where you have to protect the nuke at Fort Knox as Oddjob. You're playing as Oddjob, which is okay, and you get the hat and everything, but I've just never been really inclined to delve into these enough to unlock them. They still still suffer from much of the same gameplay issues as the main story mode. More fun is the online multiplayer, which is much the same as GoldenEye Reloaded, just with different levels and characters, of course. The downside is no one really played this when it came out, much less now, so the feature is pretty much redundant. Fortunately, I had a couple of mates who were willing to pop on so I could record some gameplay, so thanks to you guys, Bond Fan 123 and Royal Dracula, you know who you are. Anyway, yeah, it's not a bad multiplayer, really. It's cool that you get to play as classic Bond characters and each of their own unique strength, which is a nice detail. The levels that we have are fine. They're all environments from the single-player campaign with a tweak here or there, but it's just more wasted opportunity. How could they not create more movie-specific levels to celebrate the series' 50th anniversary? Even GoldenEye Rogue Agent had some pretty cool multiplayer levels to go around that were inspired by films in the series. Hey, at least the blood trickle makes a reappearance here. If you have enough people to play, I think this multiplayer would be just as fun as the GoldenEye Reloaded one. I mean, they're basically the same, but hardly anyone bought this game or cared about it or liked it enough to keep playing, which is what sadly prompted the closure of the game's developer, Eurocom, the same developer as GoldenEye Reloaded and Nightfire. So the question is, how could the developer of two of the best Bond games ever fail so badly here?
Well, pretty much everything I've complained about can be attributed to the impossible development schedule as a result of rushing the development on this thing to have it on shelves in time for Skyfall's release.
Or at least that's my own understanding. Bottom line is, there just wasn't enough cooking time for this game. All the right elements are here, they are just underbaked. The gameplay is repetitive and monotonous, and for the most part, the varied elements they try to shoehorn in just don't work as well as they could, like the driving segments, for example.
Even the cover art of the game reeks of lazy. 3 odd production stills, one of Jaws in a getup that we don't even see him in the game, and a render of Craig that makes him look more like Will Ferrell than 007.
I do really genuinely appreciate that the game was very much made with Bond fans in mind. Whether deliberate or not, unless you're a keen Bond fan with a good knowledge of the series, none of this is gonna make any sense. Any gamer can pick up GoldenEye or Everything or Nothing and run with it, while the most ardent fans can pick up on little Easter eggs along the way. Here, there's no chance of that. Didn't see Moonraker recently? You probably have no idea what's going on or why you're being asked to do the things you're doing. This is the worst Bond game I've ever played by far, and it's just so sad to even say that, given that this could well be the very last Bond game we ever get for a home console. I don't know if it was entirely based on the performance of this game or whether other factors played into it, but we've gone years now without a home console Bond release, and that's so sad, especially as the gaps between the movies seem to be getting bigger and bigger. These games used to be an amazing opportunity to fill the gap between those movie releases, but looks like that tradition has been shot dead. The credits to this game begin with the words, "James Bond will return." That is yet to happen in the video game world. No, we're not counting that. However, there are still, believe it or not, Bond games that I've never played before, so Bond game reviews will continue on this channel starting with 007 Racing, and then we're going to work our way backwards about as far as we can, and technology can allow us to go, so join me again sometime in the near future for more Bond game reviews. But for now, Bond fans, please comment below. Have I been too harsh on this game? Are there any big fans of it out there? Let me know in the comments below, and until next time, so long for now.